Good morning. I am just going to sit here for a moment and see who shows up and just be with myself until I see you, until you're present. I was just on the phone with my daughter for a while and barely made the call today because my daughter's pretty extraordinary. She works with the homeless. She works with abused women. She works with immigrants. She works with a gay transvestite community. She lives in a 16-foot person van that she rebuilt for herself. She does food banks and she organic gardens. And we were talking about how hard it is to see our beauty, how much easier it is to see our ugliness, and how when we feel weak and we feel tired and we feel futile or forlorn, that our sense of well-being and our sense of personal happiness has a tendency to go out the window. So that was kind of the setup for the call today. And one of the things I don't talk about as enough, I think, is the power of a human mind, the ability to override the emotions with a perception or a way of being that you decide you want to enforce, an idea about yourself, an idea about life that you want to enforce. And the question is, when I say that to you, you who want to enforce what you say your whole life to be, what you want to say you are, when you enforce that, what is doing that? Good morning. What is doing that? What is enforcing your point of view? We use our emotional registers to dictate what we hold to be truth or lie. For instance, if we have a feeling or a thought that we're incompetent, that feeling, that thought and that feeling, they bind together. They merge together. And so that feeling becomes the validation of the thought. So if we think I'm incompetent, and it has a biochemical response too. So it goes like this. Let's say I have the thought, I feel that I'm incompetent, or I'm ugly. Let's say we have that thought. That thought binds to a feeling, to a sensation. And when it bonds to that sensation, it creates a biochemical response. And people who have been deeply wounded, people who have experienced deep trauma, their systems get bonded to that biochemical response that happened in an incident, in an event. It can be a simple event. You can be 4 years old and your mother grabs your lollipop out of your hand, and the thought comes up with a feeling called nobody loves me, and it bonds to that feeling, and then it bonds to that biochemical response. And that's why we do the creation exercises, so we can unbond those bonds to these feelings that show up with certain thoughts, any thoughts actually. So when I was in my 20s, which is a while ago, I'm 75 this month. When I was in my 20s, I was an emotional wreck. Being a cellular empath is already bad enough because at that age, you don't have a mature emotional plane anyway, although most of us don't have a mature emotional plane. And we have all this bonding. We have all this thought bonding where a thought can trigger a feeling, and the feeling triggers a biochemical response. The body goes into fight or flight, screw it or kill it, and and we hold it to be real. We hold that feeling attached to that thought to be real. So the particular one that came up today was, I'm ugly. And it's interesting because my daughter works with people who think they're very ugly. The homeless, abused women, transgenders that cross the border and often are beaten to a pulp, left to die, and they find them. And so I said to her, sweetie, what if that bonded emotion, I'm ugly, with the feelings it evokes and the biochemical response in the gut, what if that is what you're picking up on in the collective consciousness with all the work you do? Also, she is an organic farmer, and she's one of the major players in food banks in Albuquerque so people don't starve. And I said, what if you're tying into a collective binding that's bound to this biochemical response? And she instantly got it, because everybody she works with feel disenfranchised, afraid, at risk, and therefore ugly. So I talked to her about the strength of the mental mind, perhaps not the mental mind that most people are introduced to. That's why I think the creation templates are so critical to the human mental mind, because it unbinds the trigger, the biochemical trigger, and the emotional attachment to a phrase or to a word. But we have to know that's what's happening to us. Otherwise, we will think it's a part of our identity. I received a transmission this morning at 4:13 when I finally looked at the clock. I received a transmission this morning, and it's going to be a new body of work that I'm excited about doing. And I'm going to work really hard over the next 5 days to get it languageable, so at least it can translate into people's comprehension of what might be available for themselves. But in that transmission, it really was this phenomenon of the human mind that has so much power. And we know a lot about the mind. We know if you keep thinking the same thing over and over again, it reinforces itself. But now we've really come to a critical edge. We've come to a critical edge with the human mental mind, where the power of our will could give us the opportunity to override the binding. In other words, the emotional and often biochemical response. It could give us a chance to override that binding. In other words, if you hit your thumb with a hammer, it's going to hurt. If you hit it again, it's going to hurt more. And after a while, you won't want to hit it anymore, won't want to reinforce it so it can heal. So it isn't even about replacing the binding, and we really need to do this work. We have a sense of self that is not ourself. We have a traumatized nature. Our nature has been traumatized. Let me say it better that way. Our nature has been traumatized. Our sense of self has been traumatized. We have a historic identity that is easily triggers into trauma, and trauma thoughts and trauma bindings and trauma emotions, and we think all these thoughts we actually think we're truly describing ourselves, but they're not. They're just stimulus response, Pavlov dog, no choice, reinforced probably at a young age. So even if nobody did anything, even if you didn't ever do the creation exercises, even if you didn't find a way to unbind those trigger points in your mental mind that trigger biochemical responses of fight or flight, screw it or kill it, lack of self-worth, lack of self-esteem, not wanting to move forward in life, self-awareness, self-generation, self, 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 self. In other words, you couldn't get in touch with yourself. That's why we have words like self-actualize, self-awareness, self-generate, self-aware. And what's rising inside us is the self, the phenomenon of self. And I think it takes us giving it a place. And that one of the places we could start is in the mental structure of our thought plane, giving ourselves some power over it. Because the interesting thing, this is such an oxymoron. I think it's an oxymoron. I never can get that definition right. Or it could be a paradox. Well, we don't know which. It could be both. But the interesting thing about thought is you can rule it. I mean, they talk about affirmations, intentions. You can overrule it at a very base level. I think it needs alchemical processes like the creation templates to truly remove the pathways of the biochemical response. But truthfully, will over matter has always been the fundamental premise of being a human being. It's why we have a mind. Do you notice we have a mind in a way that other creatures do not? We have a mind to use, not a mind to be at the effect of. So I have done this. I call it my roll with a punch activity, where I just refuse. I refuse to say something's real that I don't want to be real, particularly about myself. I just refuse to let it be real. It's interesting, the creation templates 3 and 4, they talk about the alchemical formula, the golden spiral, actually removes the trauma-based phenomenon and begins to move you into the next greater whole. So otherwise, we're just like one-tune Charlies. We can only sing one tune. We can't sing more than one tune. And when that tune plays us, we don't play it. So it is possible to decide to make a choice about your descriptor, how you're going to describe yourself. Now, in creation templates 3 and 4, the alchemical phenomenon is that it actually removes the biochemical triggers. It mitigates and I can't think of the word, decreases the impact of the trigger. But at the same time, you can do it. It's just a little harder, just more like bringing a hammer to something that you could just bring a soothing kind of grace to. But the phenomenon is that we're moving into a time where we need to self-describe. And usually if you self-describe, whatever you think what you're self-describing with, let's see if I can get this into a sentence. You think what you're self-describing with is the same sense of self as the one that has thought, that is not a self, but a personality matrix ruling your life, ruling your opinion of yourself, and in that regard, ruling your life. So see if you can imagine this. You may not be able to. I mean, I'm probably, because I might not be able to describe it very well, but let's go for it. Let's imagine that you're right now. Let's do it. Let's just do it. It'll be fun. So right now, let's just imagine, take a thought. Can you remember a thought that's unpleasant? Just see if you can find something like that. About yourself. Make sure that we're not going to write it on the screen. Just make sure, like mine's I'm fat. I am fat. But it's I'm fat with a trigger, if you get my meaning. Not I'm fat like a fact. I'm fat like it has meaning. It has weight, not just literally, but figuratively. It means something about me. It means why certain things can't happen for me. Something like that. Or yours could be, the world hates me, or nobody listens to me. Find something. Come on, let's play. I can hear you all being good soldiers. Stop it. Find something. Come on, nobody's listening but you. And then just invent something that you like better. Like, I could do one. So mine is, the present culture thinks heavy women are beautiful. I'm so glad that the present culture thinks heavy women are beautiful. My present culture thinks that. So I'll think that. So you pick one. Any old thing. So the point is, this will be a flicker. I doubt seriously if it'll land or have pay dirt. But just for a moment, just to crack the code on the reality of separation we were born into, separation from ourselves we were born into, just wonder who made that up. Who made up? Like for me saying to myself, wow, I wonder who made up. I love that this present culture I live in thinks heavy women are beautiful. Who made that up? Probably some sense of self that just doesn't have a place here. Okay, let's see how we did with that. I know it's like we're rotor-rootery out of this reality of separation. We're making a tunnel into realities of unity. And if you haven't read Language Creation recently or ever, to get the meaning of my statement, you probably need to order it on Amazon or whatever the other one is. Starts with Barnes and Noble, or you can order it on the website from me. I'm just really happy this morning. I've really been struggling with something since the beginning of the year, something that asked me to put something in play, some higher frequency of creation. And it's so funny last night when it all leveled out and all landed, because it was always that. It was the last almost half year. It was always what it landed as. Like, this is what the next, what's missing for human being is a sense of self as your identity, as your actual identity, not the historic one, not the one reinforced by the society you were born into, but by yourself, self-aware, self-actualized, self-training, training yourself to be established in the authentic nature of self. And one of the most fundamental aspects of being established in the fundamental nature of self is you have say. You have say. It's the Don Quixote. Everybody said, oh, he's just an idiot fighting windmills. But he had say. He had say. And if the windmills were what he was fighting, then he had say over that. So often when we start to move into a sense of self, and that sense of, and that capacity for say, regardless of evidence, when that starts to show up, there's a real conflict between your cultural indoctrination and the fact that as a child you had complete say. You could say you were a cowboy, you could say the most beautiful girl in the world, you could say that you were a millionaire, you had say. But the historic identity formed by a culture has no say. And it has to stay within the parameters of what the culture says is real. Scary, huh? Even to start into this. You can feel the personality matrix struggling to stay, to keep you stuck, keep you there. It's like that face mask they put over somebody in France. It's like you're caught in this structural matrix of personality that is addicted to belonging to a society it doesn't even find itself in. Can't get to the joy and freedom and wonder of itself. And that's not you. What you think is your personality is not you. I just want to let you know. Because ask yourself, here I can tell you, if you are you, you have say over what you say. You have say over what you perceive. You have say over who you declare yourself to be to the world. You have say over who you declare yourself to be to you. So now, try it on. How are you doing? Personality matrix, self. Personality matrix 7, self 3 out of 10. Or personality matrix 10, self 0. However, the most interesting thing is this establishment of self, which is actually the establishment of physical, mental, emotional well-being even. Isn't that amazing to find ourselves is to restore our physical, mental, and emotional well-being. Isn't that fascinating? Who thought? So let's go back to play. We're playing today. This year for me is want to play. And because we need to play. People try to go find their life or find themselves as serious, torturous, recovery-based business. And the truth is that all of a sudden Siri showed up. Sorry, Siri just started typing for me, and I don't know what to do about that. How do you get Siri to go away? All right, we have a problem. I have a very lively phone. My phone's my Siri on my phone joins the party when I don't particularly want her to. So I don't quite know how to get rid of her. So let's see if I have a way to do that, because I don't know if you all can hear me with her on. Okay. Crazy. Oh well, here we go. We're going to keep talking. Anomalies happen when you start to go outside the borders of what's acceptable. So I guess I have an anomaly this morning. So let's do the first one all over again. If you want to play, just ask yourself, who says great things about you to you when you say great things that don't have evidence, that don't necessarily live in anything you've experienced, but something that you think would be really great to be. Because anything you think would be really great to be is who you are. It's really that simple. Anything you think is really great to be is who you are. Of course. Doesn't that make sense? Now, the trick is that often we use that it would be really great to be that, like a movie star or some role that somebody plays, because we've seen something that we would like to be. Well, that's okay. Just because you saw it on someone else doesn't mean that you can't want the feeling of that way of being also. So it's not so much the role the person plays. If you have an idol, it's more the feeling you have of who you would be if you were them. So feeling really matters. Feeling really matters. But feeling is separate from the mental mind. So when you first say, see if I can unpack this, when you first say, I love being in a society where fat women are beautiful, when I first say that, I am immediately slammed with that doesn't appear to be true in the society I was born into. However, I have complete capacity to have it be true. And if you ever saw some of the men that have been attracted to me through my lifetime, who are physically gorgeous, somehow that feeling that I love feeling when I use that phrase, that feeling had a printout in physical reality. So it's such a crazy paradox, really, because we have trigger feelings, the ones that are binded to thoughts, and we're addicted to feeling thoughts with no evidence. Your feeling thoughts don't have evidence. I mean, you give it evidence, but does it really have evidence? How many of you have ever said, I'm just not a good person? Your best friend says, yes, you are. But the feeling, I'm not a good person, is you're bound, that binding between that thought and that feeling and that biochemical response reinforces it. It reinforces it. But now we're moving into 2021, moving towards 2026, and we're moving towards the being established in self. And when one begins to become established in self, I'm not saying we're there yet, and I'm not saying we know how to. I'm just pointing it out, the landscape of it. But when we begin to become established in self, we actually start to have thoughts like, wow, that was unpleasant. Why would I think that about myself? You begin to have these sort of interruptions of the addictive cycle in the system. You start to have interruptions. You might not quite be able to get to I'm the cat's meow yet, but you start to really, there's a doubt or a disruption in, maybe I'm not what that thought is. Maybe that thought is generating a feeling that I find unpleasant. Maybe I don't want that feeling. Maybe I don't want that unpleasant feeling. Maybe I should just invent a thought for fun, like a child, that has that feeling go away. Maybe if I'm really out to be alive again and lively again, I can have internal thinking that triggers feelings that are quite pleasant, quite beautiful, quite awesome. Yep, and then you fight your way through the trigger field. You fight your way through the bindings, through the attachments, through the kind of like the ivy that has grown into our tree outside, and we removed it, and now she flourishes. So you kind of have to, pull at those bindings. You have to fight those triggers that are all bound all the way down into your nervous system until they just don't carry the same effect. Now, I frankly prefer doing the creation templates because they do that by the nature of their design. But some of you won't do that. Some of you won't be interested. So this is another possibility. And even my having this conversation with you has elicited a certain level of doubt. Doubting things you think about yourself that are really unpleasant. And it's so crazy if you really think this through, what I'm talking about. It isn't trying to solve a problem. I just want to interrupt the system. The system that goes against life and doesn't have you exist as whole. That's all I'm interested in this conversation. But if you really think about that, and Deb and I did this for years when we lived in Tintagel, Ohio, one of us would say something and we would say, are you in your right mind? Would your right mind really think that about you? And we burst out laughing because obviously our right mind would never think that about us. Never. It was obvious. And we would also then ask, that's right, when the templates first came to me from a higher mind. And then we would go write a template, go write a creation exercise, get out of that mind. Just get out of that mind. It's a disgusting place to live. And so that's what we did. And but to have your thoughts be able to be scrutinized, for your ability to scrutinize your thoughts, and for you to, in the scrutinization of your thoughts, to be able to say, well, that was unpleasant, or wow, that was weird to think, or is that really real? I don't really know if that's real or not. Then you have a sense of self that's talking to you. If you start to question your thoughts, if you begin to observe them, it's called observing them. The template 1 and 2 of the observing practices for those who do the exercises. If you begin to observe them, and you begin to observe them, they begin to become separate from you. They're now out in front of you where you can look at them, and then you have say. I know it sounds simple, but everybody, from our food to our thoughts, is this inability for rigor. This inability for rigor of the sense of self, that when that sense of self matures, it becomes stronger than the biochemical response. It becomes stronger than the emotional triggers. You identify emotional triggers and biochemical response as emotional triggers and biochemical response, not as the truth of the statement in your head. Very cool. I can't get Surrey down, so I don't on my screen. So if anybody wants to ask a question, I can't see it. So I'm sorry for that, because for some reason it's frozen on my screen. But I do so much more appreciate being on my cell phone than my computer, because on my computer I can't see you all, and I can't see you're there, and I can't engage at the level that I want to engage by seeing your faces and seeing your names. So it's really, I'm really appreciative of that. So I've been having this word in my head. I'm very excited today, because once I have a transmission from a greater, higher mindedness, higher frequency base of what by affecting something a certain way will have a ripple effect and affect a lot of things in an effective way. I'm pretty excited. And it means things can move fast, and things need to move fast right now. If we find the thing that if we take that on, our lives will begin to transform and transmute and become equal to what this rising sense of self is this rising sense of self that's happening in our society, that's really breaking up our entire society, because the societies of our present planet, the popular ones, are not based on a sense of self. They're not based on being established in self. They're not based on to thine own self be true. They're not based in know thyself. And so I kept having this word show up, which just sounded tacky, but it kept showing up. So it's one of those where I had to pay attention to the word and not the triggers and not the emotions or feelings that came with it. And the word was training. And I thought, I really need to train people in self. But there was something didn't work right with the phrase, I need to train people in self, in self-actualizing and being established in self, which is probably true. But then I had this other two words that were going on called self-study. And because people need to self-generate now, it's fine if you want to go find an authority outside yourself and try to model yourself out of what you hear them say. But if you don't recognize that what you hear them say is yourself responding to the same thing in you that you hear in them, it's a missing equation. And it's a fundamental equation to the recovery of the system of paradise here. So all of a sudden in my 4:13 hour, when I looked at the clock, it all came together that I'm looking for people that want to self-train, want to train themselves in their own establishment of themselves as self. And that's exciting. And then formulate a way that gives them a great shot. It seems to make sense to me. So I'm really on my bandwagon now, because I knew it. The strange thing is, and I know you all go through this too, that it was right in my face the whole time. It just didn't configure, the thought patterns didn't configure in a way that I could see the landscape of what was occurring and how to do something about it, how to create something that could provide something that would be fun and of value. And here's the other thing. We're not recovering from the past anymore. Our word base and our thought base and our lack of word base and our lack of feeling base and the high potency of reaction to things, and realizing that we don't know where we can stand, we don't quite know who we are in the matter, that's all good news. That's not bad news. That's all good news. And so the phenomenon of what's before us is, regardless of circumstance, regardless of events, when you have a sense of self and you know yourself, to thine own self be true, not in action, but in a sense of being true to you internally, not letting thoughts that don't think you right have any kudos, listen to your thinking and choose thinking you want, choose your thinking you don't want. fundamental premise of the creation exercises is, if it's life enhancing, think it. If it's not life enhancing, don't think it. And when you don't think what's not life enhancing and you begin to think what is life enhancing, you have a sense of self. Your sense of self begins to rise. And that's going to populate the future. That's the population of paradise. And the last thing, which is the trickiest thing, is going back to my statement. See if you can follow this thread. Because see, it goes in a spiral where most people go forward like looking for the thing or looking for the answer, as if the thing or the answer is going to give them what they need, rather than they spiral to include more and more and more and more and more until they suddenly get the whole landscape, whatever they're curious about, whatever they're at work about. So let's go back to years ago, because, Siri went away. Praise the Lord. Hopefully she won't come back. I love you, Siri, but you don't belong on Facebook Live. Now you can ask questions if you want to, because I can see you. So let me go back to years ago when I realized I knew I had a body that was both traumatized by being here as a cellular sensitive and also by historic events that happened in my childhood. So I think I could easily say that if my body didn't have a shot, if it turned out my body didn't have a shot to recover effectively for what had happened to me, I was going to make darn sure that I had a sense of self that did, that I would reclaim myself. So I did. I did that. Short story. I reclaimed a sense of self and then took into account the fact that the body might not follow suit. Now the body might follow suit. Now, because the consciousness is raised and the vibration of the types of realities of which I'm a part are reinstating themselves here. So my body could now have a place where in the vibrational fields of creation that it didn't have a place in the collapse fields that I was born into. So actually a long time ago, I took on that the size of my body was an illusion. And that, that's kind of what I did. This might be a little high tech, but in the etheric worlds, but in vibrational frequency and psychic awareness, but we'll go for it anyway. So I just took on that my body was an illusion. And I didn't try to do anything about it, what the world thought about it. I just took on it was an illusion and that I knew my right body. And I do. I know exactly what she looks like. And I know exactly who she is. And I know exactly how she feels inside this illusionary body. Now, this is all my thinking, okay? So you all could say, well, that was a method, or that was something she did to avoid her suffering or to not handle her trauma. Well, good luck, because the feeling of it felt fantastic. And it was the feeling of what I thought that mattered, not the thought. And then this memory formed in, like, Victorian body. I have a Victorian body, and of course we were considered luscious back then. So I took on that feeling. And then when I was in Saudi Arabia, I actually had to have a bodyguard. This is the truth. I actually had to have a bodyguard because a couple of times it was really favorable to abduct me. And I'd have a bodyguard who carried a big golf umbrella so that I wouldn't become abducted. So every time I was in one of those experiences, I could reinforce what I don't. Also in Ireland, they don't have the concept of beauty that they do in the United States. And obviously, one of my lovers was a 29 years younger than me, gorgeous goddess, godlike looking male. And one of the people on here actually met him and fled when she met him. He was so gorgeous because he really brings up the erotic nature of a woman. And but interestingly enough, playing around with all that and letting myself feel myself in those different situations actually created a pattern of a printout in reality of men that have been attracted to me. So it's really hard to language it. It's so funny. I've become unglued as I finish my 8 years of work I did because it was successful in the greater systems of which we're a part. It was heard by the greater nature of creation, and the greater nature of creation is responding. And I'm aware that 99% of all humanity, maybe not, hopefully not that many, only think that they're only human beings, that we're just this linear group of things crawling around on the surface of the earth. We don't realize we're being watched by greater powers and forces of creation that operate on our behalf. But I've never not done that. I've always been in unity with the greater forces of creation that operate on behalf of all life here and seek to have us exist as whole. Any of them that want to meet me, and any of them that I go to meet. So I have a very different point of view about reality and life than most people do. The interesting thing is, over the last year, moving into this year, two things are pressuring the human psyche. One is returning to our magic, which requires us being in the awesome coolness of ourselves, that healthy ego Carl Jung used to talk about. And it also has to do that realize that we share space with the powers and forces of creation that generated this beautiful place, and that we're part of its caretakers. We're part of the caretakers of making sure that that where we're standing, that which operates on behalf of life and has us exist as whole inside our feeling nature is reestablished, because the feeling nature elicits the condition and structure of the physical world. I'm going to say that one more time before I close for the day. The feeling nature elicits the structure and mental concepts of the physical world. Namaste.